Gibson has been described as the prophet of cyberspace, the sage of the information age, and the man who saw tomorrow. Although this is accurate, it is far from complete. Even if you have not read Gibson's books and don't really care about him, you have been exposed to his ideas through osmosis and the impact he has had on sci-fi. Raised in a region described as surreal and disturbing, Gibson is now regarded as a recluse. Yet, behind the foggy veil, there is a man who led a tumultuous life. This life gifted him with almost supernatural foresight. This is Sean, and together let's approach the life and times of William Gibson and ask ourselves, what circumstances created the most prolific speculative science fiction writer, and what were the prophecies he made? The New York Times called him the initiator of cyberpunk. Born 1948 in American Appalachia to a small family, Gibson would have a difficult upbringing. Appalachia at the time was an area where people looked at someone from 10 miles away as belonging to another tribe, and anyone from another state was alien. It was full of distrust. In his formative years, Gibson attended Pines Elementary School, where he was largely neglected by his teachers, stunting his ability to read and causing his parents significant stress. The earliest literature he can remember reading is the Pogo comics. Written in dialect and set in a swamp in the Midwest, it was a humble start to a literary journey destined for greatness. Just 1 year into his time at Pines Elementary, his father tragically passed away in an accident. His mother, unable to break the news, got someone else to do it for her. Looking for new beginnings, the family moved town to Whiteville, Virginia. Whiteville at the time was going through a technological revolution, catching up with the recent advances of the period. However, the people of this town deeply distrusted these technologies. It's this sudden change, the traumatizing death of his father, moving from town to town, and the adoption of new technologies, which gave Gibson, as he described it, a feeling of abrupt exile. Exiled from one time period to the next, Gibson would credit this transition as the beginning of his relationship with science fiction, his native literary culture. As we move forward, we will continually refer back to this period in Gibson's life, as we will see many themes come through in his work which originate from this difficult time. Time moves in one direction, memory in another. Gibson wrote in 2012. Gibson had a number of mostly stable years throughout high school. Although referring to the monoculture he grew up in as problematic, he would later be grateful for his time in boarding school, as it forced him to engage socially and overcome his reclusive habits. This period came to an abrupt end with the death of his mother, when Gibson was just 18 years of age. Once again, Gibson's life would be thrown into turmoil, leading to his most chaotic years. While there is no singular defined and accepted timeline for the following period, I have done my best to reconstruct it. He would drop out of high school and become a very isolated young man. Traveling throughout the US and Europe, he immersed himself in the countercultures of that era, going so far as to befriend Timothy Leary, a pioneer of psychedelic drugs, most famously LSD. These countercultures will later appear in Gibson's work. By 1967, the Vietnam War was underway, and Gibson moved to Canada, joining a community of American draft dodgers. As a result, he became homeless. A review without nuance would label him as a draft dodger, but the true underlying motivation for moving was not one of survival or conscientious objection, but rather, in Gibson's own words, a desire to sleep with hippie chicks. He was never put into the moral dilemma of actually being drafted. Gibson would later remark, when I started out as a writer, I took credit for draft evasion where I shouldn't have. If somebody had drafted me, I might have wept and gone. It's in Toronto where Gibson met Deborah Jean Thompson. The two hit it off quickly. Embarking on an adventure through Europe, they almost exclusively visited poorer, non-EU aligned countries. This was purely for economic reasons, as at the time these countries were incredibly cheap to visit, and as Gibson put it, they couldn't afford to stay anywhere that had anything remotely like hard currency. This provided him with a view into almost alien societies which operated under different political ideologies, and also strengthened his relationship with Deborah Jean Thompson as they eventually got married. This would largely end the tumultuous period of Gibson's life, and he would return to Canada, attend university, and would quickly get noticed as a standout writer. It's at this stage where we can now look back and properly review the influences which occur in Gibson's writings. Most famously, Gibson's work heavily focuses on and forecasts advancements in technologies, writing extensively about virtual reality, alternative reality, artificial intelligence, digital money, and most impressively, the internet, referred to as the Matrix. Some, in hindsight, have claimed these forecasts were obvious and nothing profound. Yet I believe being able to identify the direction technology was heading in the early 1980s is no small feat. More importantly, Gibson prophesied the relationship these technologies would have in our society. In the seminal cyberpunk work Neuromancer, Gibson depicted a society addicted to technology. Corporations controlled and owned these technologies, and as a result carried more power than governments. They exerted control over the population and created a new strata of social class while also disenfranchising huge swaths of society, leading to the creation of what is now regarded as cyberpunk's core theme: high tech, low life. This theme can be found buried deep in Gibson's past. Growing up in Appalachia, one of America's poorest regions, he witnessed a period of modernization and experienced firsthand the effects it has on the already disenfranchised. Technology and society leaves them behind. Gibson's acute awareness of the disparity technology creates was best represented in Count Zero, where billionaires with nebulous goals were described as no longer remotely human, in contrast to the crumbling social order and squalor the protagonists experienced. A contrast not so foreign from what is occurring today. The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Gibson's works typically are set in a society going through transition. The peripheral details the apocalyptic period known as Jackpot, where humanity's population plummets due to various global catastrophes. The Sprawl trilogy depicts the epoch of sentient, godlike artificial intelligence, and the Difference engine exposes the reader to a period of extreme technological progression in a steampunk setting. Transition in Gibson's life was not always easy, particularly the death of his father and subsequent move to Whiteville, Virginia. Later, Gibson would deal with another harsh transitional period after the passing of his mother and dropping out of high school. In his stories, the transition of society is never a positive one. At best, they are all morally grey. Much like Gibson himself, the characters which existed during these difficult transitional periods managed to survive and succeed. In life, impactful events tend to just occur without rhyme or reason. William Gibson knew this better than anyone. The sudden death of his father at a young age and subsequently being informed of his death by a third party had influenced his writings. Throughout Gibson's novels, events just happen. In Neuromancer, the leading antagonist Riviera suddenly and abruptly is killed off-page. The details of his death are never made certain. In Burning Chrome, Ricky never returns from her trip to Night City without explanation. In many ways, this can be viewed as fatalism, as the leading characters have, in some way, no true control over the events and society which surrounds them. Lost, so small amid that dark, hands grown cold, body image fading down corridors of television sky. Countercultures are often present within Gibson's work. In Count Zero, we are introduced to the Gothics and the Casuals, two gangs diametrically opposed in both philosophy and style. The Gothics, featuring more predominantly, were most likely inspired by Gibson's forays into countercultures during his travels throughout Europe and later his experiences of avant-garde artists. These cultures are more than just set pieces, and Gibson has made an effort to include unique, smaller, and historical cultures in many of his stories. Most notably, Neuromancer features Rastafarian-inspired space colonies, and Count Zero's ghosts in the Matrix are inspired by voodoo gods. On a side note, Gibson wrote these Rastafarian characters using dialect, which is an interesting reference back to his first comic books, Pogo. The celebration of multiculturalism, of course, originating from Gibson's early experiences of monoculture and his disdain for it, expressing this disdain in his writing by not only including his own culture but the cultures of others. Now, it's not that Gibson dislikes his own culture, as it is the predominant overarching culture in all his books. It's that Gibson clearly values the input multiple cultures can have on a society. Fully imagined cultural futures were the luxury of another day, one in which now was of some greater duration. Social outcasts are a common experience in Gibson's novels. They can be drug addicts such as Case or antisocial individuals like Turner. They are often burned by their past, or they are on the path to build their own future. Crucially, however, they are always incredibly talented, and it's always this talent which leads to their eventual triumph. Gibson's life was not easy. He experienced the most difficult aspects life could throw at an individual at a very young age. He was stripped of both his parents before he fully reached adulthood. He became a vagrant for a number of years and only came to his true self after establishing some stability with his wife. Throughout all these events, if there was one constant in his life, it was that Gibson was a fundamentally talented person. He was able to absorb, understand, and eventually leverage these events to formulate stories. He would then put these stories to paper using a unique style which shines through in his work. I strongly recommend Gibson's past work and any future work he produces, as you will encounter a truly special literary experience, and you may be able to get a glimpse into our future. The future is there, looking back at us, trying to make sense of the fiction we will have become. This has been Sean from If Else. It would be a huge help to the channel if you subscribed or engaged with this video through likes and comments. I appreciate all the amazing comments I have received from you all on my past Cyberpunk videos, so thank you. And I hope to see you again.